Fourth Science Cafe, so thank you all for coming. I'm very excited. It's been, we've had a great several sessions. We had climate change 2 weeks ago, we've had ancient migrations, we've had a lot of interesting things coming up as well. So today we're going to learn about the promise and perils of digital democracy. We have two speakers today from the informatics department. They are both graduate students. It's Karissa McKelvey from Conover. Michael is almost done with his time here. This is Michael over here. And I will keep this very brief, but Michael has already lined up a job with LinkedIn. And so we'll be interested to see where that takes you. But meanwhile, we're very fortunate to have both of them talk to us about the intersection of informatics and technology and elections. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to the two of you.
Or you can stand.
In any event, so yeah, we're gonna talk about how communication technologies are affecting the political process. And we're from the Center for Complex Networks and Systems Research, and we look at really large-scale systems that exhibit behaviors in the aggregate that are not characteristic of any of the individual components. And an example of a complex system would be a flock of birds, where when you watch, for example, when they're engaged in predator avoidance, they have a very elegant structure to the flock that is not encoded in any of the decision-making of any one bird. They're all making local decisions. And so humans engage in this sort of activity when we participate in economies or traffic. There are a number of different kinds of systems that we're constantly engaged in making local decisions that have statistical structure in the aggregate that can tell us something about how society functions. And so we're in this blessed period in the development of the social sciences and the political sciences and the computational sciences where we're able to capture unprecedented volumes of data about human opinion and behavior through these digital traces that people produce when they engage online. And if you want to click over to the next slide. So here we have...
So we could raise the sound.
Raise the sound. So basically here we have Facebook, a map of connectivity on Facebook as it exists in a geospatial sense. We feel it? And so when you have 1 billion people logging into Facebook at least once a month, you can begin to infer, insofar as friendships on Facebook are a proxy for real-world social connectivity, you can begin to infer the connective tissue or the network structure of a human social network at a global scale. You can begin to understand the flows of information, the flows of ideas and trends and any of a number of things. This is a map for our social network. And when you have such high-resolution data, as you do at this scale, you can be very precise about the kinds of questions you ask. But they're also beyond sort of explicit declarations of information, like, where are you from? I'm from Bloomington, Indiana, male, I'm 20. This is an explicit declaration. We implicitly generate data. Here we have the GPS data from taxi cabs in Lisbon, Portugal. And lines here correspond to thoroughfares, and they're greener when the taxis are moving more quickly, and redder when they're moving more slowly. This is generated implicitly just by the presence of the GPS receiver, but it can inform policy decisions. We might try to connect these two parts of the city. Here we see slow connectivity, but major flows. We can make strategic decisions about policy and about planning using these kinds of data sets. And what we'll be talking about in large part today is how the political process unfolds online. And of course, I think everybody is familiar with the Arab Spring, and this was a complex political and social process that unfolded in many different places and at many different time scales, and on many different platforms, and largely the streets. But by aggregating data sources from news media and from on-the-ground accounts and from social media, you can begin to see, this is a visualization that Garden put together, you can begin to see the unfolding across different locations in time of this phenomenon. You can get a more refined lens on these kinds of social processes. And so what we're experiencing now with the advent of the internet is, it's crazy to think about. I love that I get to study this. It's as fundamental a structural shift in the way that information spreads as the printing press was. Historically, it was impossible to archive or preserve data. You had transcription errors, and you had, just the enormous costs. It cost something like $20,000 to produce a book. They were expressions of wealth, and it was the Bible. This was the book that got copied. And with the printing press, you had now the ability to produce information cheaply and disseminate it broadly. And this is a fundamental change in the organizational structure of information spreading. And you see this evolution over time, but it largely represents a broadcast model where you have to have access to the means of production. You have to have capital to put on a satellite or to build a radio transmitter or to own TV broadcast spectrum. And so this has characterized information spreading historically. There's a fundamental shift that's characterized by the development of the internet that changes how things work.
So with the beginning of the web, we see there's also a broadcast infrastructure. So we characterize this as Web 1.0. And how many of you heard of Web 1.0 or 2.0? Okay, that's legitimate. Okay, so Web 1.0 was characterized by organizations which had access to the means of production of a website. So it was very expensive, and also you had to have a lot of expertise in order to create a website, in order to produce content on a website. And we see this, the beginning of the internet in the 90s, and you can characterize it as a one-to-many, a broadcast, a one-to-many. One producer would have many consumers. With Web 2.0, we see a paradigm shift. We see individuals are able to produce content, whether it be the social networks, blogs, or comment boards, or chat rooms, but users are able to create content and share that content with one another. This creates very low barriers to entry. As long as you can type and have an internet connection, you can produce content. You don't have to know you don't have to know PHP or MySQL, you don't have to make a website, you don't have to hire anyone, you can just type. Which is sort of a revolutionary way to think, right? Because everyone can connect with anyone else as long as you have that internet connection and that typing ability. And with this many-to-many structure, people can not only share, their words, but they can also share their art. They can share things on YouTube. They can just inform political discussion, for instance. So we think this is a very interesting phenomenon because it creates a creative commons. So the internet becomes a space where people can share and upload and create, and there are many, many advantages to this. So, for example, you might just be able to connect with someone who's across the world and share your art with them. There's very low barrier of entry to that. You don't have to hire a recording company, you don't have to create a website, you can just share your content. Okay, so this is fine. So there's a dark side to this, though.
It's Darth Vader.
It's Darth Vader. Yeah, that's okay. So there's a dark side to this, though. It's really unfortunate. Actually, we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So people think that they're anonymous, traditionally. So in the 90s or in the 90s or like the early 2000s, you'd say, oh yeah, so I'm just going to make an account on Twitter or this blog, and it might be anonymous, right? And people don't necessarily think that their Craigslist ads or their posts on Flickr or whatever are going to actually translate to them. Everybody thinks there's this perception that you're highly anonymous online. But actually, online behavior is becoming the behavior of humanity. So social environments, such as Facebook, you're sitting right there. That's okay. Social environments such as Facebook give us a very raw picture of who is producing content. You can actually connect those to real people. So when you're actually online, you're not talking to random people anymore. You're actually talking to your friends, your family.
And so what happens is that people compartmentalize sometimes. Stand up for the camera. They try to compartmentalize their activity. And so, like, who I am on Facebook is different from who I am on Craigslist, for example. And so, a colleague of mine, and a cybersecurity researcher, had the notion that everybody has one good photo. You've got that great profile picture. And the thinking is that you use that in multiple different contexts. And so what he did is he scraped Facebook. This was maybe 5-6 years ago. He scraped Facebook and collected profile names and photos for individuals, and then scraped the Craigslist personal ads for romantic connectivity. I'm just looking, you're out there, you're anonymous, but you've got that one great photo, and you're just banking on nobody recognizing you. But what he tried to do was stitch these two together, and because of some sort of technical limitations with how you identify the same photo, it wasn't possible at the time, but since then, with facial recognition technology, this has become a very tractable problem. And so, can I tell the girls around us here? This is now like this can happen. And there was an app that was banned from the iPhone recently called Chicks Around Me. What it did is it took there's a tool called Foursquare that says, I'm checking in at Rachael's Café. I'm here at 6:30. And it took check-ins from people on Foursquare, women on Foursquare, who had Facebook, had merged their Facebook connectivity with their Foursquare profile. And it used this information to give a heads-up display, and this it scared me, of women who had checked in at locations near you in the last 15 minutes with links to their Facebook profile. So you show up, and this total stranger, and you're like, hey, do you like Harry Potter? And it's funny, but it's not. It's funny, but it's not, because there's no way to foresee the way that your information may be recombined for exploitative purposes. And the Apple App Store pulled this because it's creepy, but it's very difficult to manage all of your different data sources and the ways that you're exposing information about yourself.
So this also has implications for surveillance. So this is a guy with Facebook, big robot, pushing over Big Brother, saying amateur. I don't know if you've heard much about Facebook's partnership with police and the government, but Facebook is actually giving your chat logs for free to police officers if they ask for it. And this is, they use it to search for criminal activity, for example. But there is a certain, when I said it, everybody was like, what? My private chats are available by police? Yeah, and they'll use it in court, actually. And it's a problem for civil liberties, right? So your mail, the police can't look through your mail or tap your phone, technically, unless they have a warrant, right? But they can take your Facebook chats for free and use those in court. And so where's the difference there? There actually is, there's none in practical sense, but in terms of the law, they're able to do that.
So, is it free, or do they have to pay a charge, or how does that work?
There's actually, a dissertation rank.
It's like $20.
$20, okay. And so there must be some part of the company then that just services police requests. Now,
Gmail also does it. Yeah.
How many police requests are there in a year?
AT&T, he asked how many requests. This is this information is kept private, but AT&T was servicing so many requests from police officers that they built an automated system to handle the volume of traffic. They said, we can't handle, we just can't approve them. And
Just
so
for government bureau officers?
I mean, this is like cops across the street can put in these. It's not like an issue of coming into your home. It's just, well, we're going to cooperate because you want favorable legislative policy. You want lawmakers to not perceive you as protecting child predators. And so if the cops are like, well, we're going after drug traffickers and child predators, it's very difficult organizationally to say, well, we're here for the Fourth Amendment. So it's sort of a tough situation.
Yeah.
One thing police do, actually, it's part of the reason crime has gone down immensely. On average over the last so many years, is they do a cell dump of any crime scene. They ask all the cell phone companies, by the way, whose cell phone was there at this specific time? And they get a range of in the entire area. And that's why police have been so much more effective at closing so many things. It's like electronic DNA.
It's a very good way to characterize it.
There's a question.
I know that Reddit is becoming a more popular form of social activism, but it's also, it prides itself on being sort of the underground sort of social movement. Do you know if they have any links to doing this sort of stuff that Facebook does in terms of state surveillance?
I've never heard of that.
I think there's strong reasons to keep it private if they do. So it's tough.
Yeah. So Reddit was recently, there's child porn on Reddit, and they're like, we're not going to, write anything about Reddit. Reddit is completely anonymous. So I'm assuming that they just keep it anonymous. So this has international implications too. So if I tag my sexual orientation and I go to somewhere like Uganda, that could be a problem, right? So this isn't just the United States we're talking about. The internet is prevalent all around the globe. It's also, so this says if you aren't paying for the product, you are the product. And this is actually becoming more and more the case. So there's a reason why Facebook gives you an account for free, and like Gmail gives you an account for free with 10 gigabytes on it. Because they go and sell your information to companies who want to sell things to you. And not only do these companies use ads or just basic, I'm going to send you spam email or whatever, they actually also do things like take your content and recombine it into something like a spam bot on Twitter. It's like a robot that just tweets out things that it's taken from people's emails or something like that. It's like natural language. That is. So we also see this with AstroTurf and misinformation. Does anyone know what AstroTurf is? No one.
The literal
AstroTurf, as in, okay. So, like a grassroots movement is like a political movement that is by many individuals. It's by many individuals that contribute to some political movement, right? Something like Occupy Wall Street or Tea Party would be classified as one recently in the United States. AstroTurf is the action of some high level, very maybe resourceful individual or organization creating the illusion of a grassroots movement. Does that make sense? So something like on Twitter, what they might do, this says America Loves Mitt, it says endorsement video, the Haleys and Romneys tour South Carolina, and it has a link to a YouTube video with a bunch of hashtags. It's pretty specific, but it's definitely pro Mitt Romney, and there is no profile image, and it's very generic. The next one is RB. It says RB Pundit. It's got some random building as an image. It says, stop what you're doing, watch this, then share it far and wide. This needs to go viral immediately. And it's hashtag TCOT, which means top conservatives on Twitter. These are examples of, just things I pulled off Twitter right before I did this, put this presentation together, right? These are just things that I saw on Twitter. But how do you know if these are real people? How do you know if these are real people? You have no idea. This could, especially with the second one, it says, stop what you're doing, watch this. Sure, like that, that could be to any URL. Like you could say that on any URL. It could just be like a spam bot just doing this over and over again for different URLs and different accounts. This is could be a serious problem for the way that people do research for this. So say you want to say, oh, like I'm on an individual level, I'm going to say, oh, like this person must be talking about Mitt Romney. So I'm going to look at all the people that talk about Mitt Romney, but you have some, like, are these actual people? I don't know. So very individual level, it's very hard to tell if these are actual people or misinformation. You want to?
So it bears mentioning that this happens on both sides of the political spectrum. It's not a right or left issue. This really is endemic. And so the problem is whether or not you can develop a machine learning apparatus that can, because it's very hard for an individual to make an informed decision about this, but there's statistical signatures at the local level that give us a sense for whether something is organic or forged. But we can also look for structure in the aggregate. And here we have, this is some recent work of ours on structured political communication on Twitter ahead of the 2010 elections. And in this image, each point is a person, or a Twitter user. And a blue line connects 2 points if I retweet content that you've produced. If you say something and I want to rebroadcast it to my followers or endorse it, we draw a blue edge, and we draw an orange line between 2 points if one individual mentions another person. So I want to get your attention. I use your username in a tweet, and I send you a message but in a public way. And so what we see here is that these two communities of individuals are preferentially rebroadcasting content produced by other individuals within that community, but they're engaging across that divide using mentions. And so a natural question to ask is whether or not these two groups correspond to political left and right. So we sampled 1,000 people from this network and we manually annotated them, and it does turn out that about 85% of the people in that blue community expressed a left-leaning political identity. About 95% of the people in that red community expressed a right-leaning political identity. And so this means that it ties back to this problem of how easy it is. We develop these systems that make it very easy to select out content that reinforces your pre-existing opinions. Amazon's book recommendations suggests books that are like those that you've already read. Facebook suggests people who know the people you already know. You can develop a news aggregator that will make it possible to just read about bicycles for 18 hours a day. And you have this wealth of information and this ability to select only for the information that reinforces your pre-existing opinions. And as we see here, individuals on both sides of the partisan spectrum are not being exposed to credible opposing ideas. In fact, I mean, you look at these tweets that form this bridge between them qualitatively. I mean, it's flame bait. They're talking trash, and so you reinforce those in-group, out-group stereotypes. And so this is one of those dark sides to political communication online, is that this fosters an environment of extremism, and we see this in the hyper-partisan nature of our modern political discourse. And I think this is just one piece of the puzzle, but it's certainly an important one. And so the question we have, sort of from a research perspective, is why would these two networks, here we see mentions flow between these two groups, but retweets don't. Why would they have such different structure? And it's kind of a clever technique that these people are using. They'll produce a piece of content, and when you add a hashtag, which is a £sign followed by a piece of text, to a tweet, it contributes it to that content stream. Anybody who clicks on that link will see all of the tweets with that hashtag. It's a stream identifier, like a radio frequency or television channel. And so when I click, when I produce this tweet, I'm going to annotate it with P2, which is Progressives 2.0, Dems, Progressives, and top conservatives on Twitter. And so for very low marginal cost, I can inject my piece of political propaganda into a content stream whose primary audience would not select to see it ahead of time. It's like there's no editor. Anybody can choose what's in the newspaper. So when I'm exposed to content in this way, I'm not likely to rebroadcast it, but may respond to the provocation in the form of a mention. And so this is one of the ways that we can combine qualitative and quantitative analyses to get a sense for how the political process is unfolding online. And if we look at the preferences for people when they're selecting for different hashtags on the left and the right, we see the partisan spectrum begin to emerge. It's interesting, for example, that Judaism is a far left hashtag, but Israel is a far right hashtag. If you want to put it there. We can also study the structure of social movements. This is a network, there's a map behind this network, it's the US, corresponding to the communication patterns of individuals participating in the Occupy Wall Street meme on Twitter. And basically, on the left, we have the network that we saw previously, stable political communication. And on the right, we have the Occupy Wall Street network, which is social movement communication. And you see that it's much more concentrated. For the Occupy Wall Street network, New York, DC, and California are the principal hubs out of which information is being produced. They account for about 50% of the total content. And so proximity to on-the-ground events we know is important. But what's interesting, and this I think is the emerging mode of inquiry in this discipline, is to take statistical analyses and blend them with political theory or social science theory. If we talk about social movements and the problems that they face, well-established themes are that of resource mobilization, getting people, money, tents, sanitation facilities, information technology. Resource mobilization is the problem of getting the resources required to sustain a political movement. And collective framing relates to the establishment of narrative frames like we are the 99% that describe the state of the world and foster the sense of collective identity. If we look at the tweets that flow between users in different states as opposed to users in the same state, we begin to see how these people are using this technology, this communication platform, to address these challenges in different ways. We find that states between users in the same tweet include 99%, much more frequently than those between users in different states. The media, peaceful, news. This is how do we conceive of ourselves? What is our problem statement? We are the 99%. I've got this backwards. Damn it. What I'm trying to say is that when you're talking to people far away from you, you're engaging in this frame making. You're saying, what are we doing? Who are we and what are we doing? When you're talking to people that are nearby, you're talking about, join me show solidarity, join me in the city park tonight. This is getting boots on the ground. This is that resource mobilization problem. And so what we observe statistically in this network is well matched by the theoretical implications of the social science theory. And so exploring these previously untested hypotheses with large-scale data, this is a fundamental change in how we do social sciences research. You can look at, there's a $4 billion political advertising industry. We're all seeing the effects of this, in writ large, on the news and TV and radio. And so this looking at historical records for election prediction is a major motivating factor. And using some of the machinery that we've developed, I think one can be conflicted about this, whether it's for good or for ill. You can develop insights into the structure of political communication that tell you about individuals. So we can use that network to infer individuals' political leanings. But we can also look at what you say, and we can say which hashtags are you contributing to, and use that to make predictions about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals on Twitter. And so what we can do is say, I have 100,000 people, and I have a high-quality inference for their political affiliation. What websites are they visiting? Left-leaning political users who've tweeted about immigration reform visit these websites. And what's interesting is if you look at the correlation between the popularity of a website on Twitter and its popularity in general, there's only very weak correlation. So effectively, you have sites in the upper left-hand quadrant that are very popular among this politically active social media users, which are a rather high-value group, but that are not globally popular. And so this is an inefficiency in this market. You can leverage this and buy advertising space on these highly popular websites in a very targeted way. You can also look at the policy issues these people are talking about, and you can begin to see how they're contrasting. This is for 2010. But taxes dominate both sides of the partisan spectrum. It's interesting to see that corporations is an important word for the left, but not for the right. They talk about business. Unemployment, Medicare, education are traditional left-leaning terms, but it's somewhat surprising to me. Here we have foreign policy issues in brown, that words like Iraq, Afghanistan, defense, and China are more prominent in the discourse of those on the left. And so we can get a lens into the different focuses of these two communities using these sort of text marking techniques. We can also see where they're coming from, and this is basically a heat map a map that describes where this content's originating from. And it's interesting that in this space where you can freely connect with individuals, regardless of who they are or where they come from, that you still have this highly segregated partisan slang to essentially reconstruct the Bible Belt and the left-leaning coast. You can also look at how these two people engage with this platform differently. And in 2008, one of the dominant paradigms, I guess, frames was that the liberals won the election because they were more on the ball with social media. And we can see if that persists by looking at how frequently individuals on the right are producing content. It turns out that these right-leaning users are much more effectively using the Twitter platform ahead of the 2010 elections. They have more friends in general, they're more likely to include a URL, they're more likely to self-identify their partisan affiliation in their biography, their little profile. They say, I am a constitutional conservative. They're on Twitter as an outlet for political expression. And when you think about this as you want to share information about a campaign or call for donations or news items or calls to action, they have these strong structural advantages that suggest a sea change in how effectively the right is utilizing social media. And so whether this is related to incumbency, is it just the out party that's more active and more engaged, is a question we could begin, if we perform this survey longitudinally, we could begin to answer large-scale structural questions about how about partisanship and incumbency and political engagement online over longer periods of time, and develop new hypotheses that are driven from the data. And I think that's my jam.
So, with this digital democracy, we've obviously, Mike has characterized how we engage in democratic discussion, deliberation, and discourse online. We see that there's a lot of interest in communication research, actually, in researching the communication of how people are engaging. There's also this idea of the wisdom of the crowd that people like to talk about. So the crowd is wise, and what you're doing when you're doing these sorts of things is trying to see how they're wise, or trying to characterize how the crowd engages with each other. So what we've done, this is part of my research this year, is the TRUTHY project. I'm actually extending the TRUTHY project. The TRUTHY project is an open data platform, and it gives researchers and citizens and journalists the ability to look into these communication networks real time, and how Twitter is reflecting these structural qualities in the last 3 months. So you can go to that next slide. So you can see on Twitter right now how Progressives 2.0 or Tea Party or top libertarians on Twitter, how these communities look at a very high level. You can see on P2 you have two very dense clusters. So maybe these are two people who are disagreeing. Maybe it's people who are very, very left, progressive left, and maybe these are moderate left who are maybe disagreeing about something. You also see the sort of same thing on Tea Party. So you can kind of look at this sort of very high-level structural overview. You can also try and find things like spam. So this is what the TRUTHY project was actually created for in the first place, was to find astroturf and misinformation on these Twitter networks. So if you look here, this is a very small, dense cluster of users who are all mentioning each other. And there seems to be this pattern between how they're mentioning each other and how this communication is structured, right? And we can see this just with the naked eye, that this looks a little fishy. It doesn't look like the ones that we saw before. And so we can probably characterize this is probably truthy, this is probably spam or misinformation or astroturf, or someone creating a robot or multiple robots to just mention each other all the time and try and drum up support for a candidate or a company or something.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can you go back and
Yeah.
better describe what those fan-shaped objects are in the graph? I don't quite follow.
Okay, right. So each one of these dots is a user, and each line in between them is a mention. So someone might mention another person. So say, follow this person for great political commentary. And then, so we draw a line between those users. So then we do this for a whole host of users, and then we can get the structure of how communication flows. You can think of it as if you put a drop of ink in some point of this, like communication. If you had one person send a tweet, who are the other people that this person interacts with? How is it likely that this information will spread to those next people?
So just to follow up on this, so if somebody tries to get your attention, they say, click on this URL. This is actually for a nightclub promotion. They say, click on this URL. If you visit that person's page and say, who is this person? They don't have any interactions, you're like, well, this is just a spammer. And so each of these accounts where you see the fan is targeting, let's say, 20 people. But to create the illusion that they're not robots and that they're actually people just talking about how great this nightclub is, they communicate with one another.
Yeah.
And so you see these connectivities between the fans that forge the illusion of actual social interaction.
I see.
And so that may not be apparent at the local level, but when we look at it in the statistical aggregate, those patterns begin to come out.
Yeah, let's get this one. Did you have something?
Yeah, so would an actual person be represented by a more tight-knit, I guess, focus? I don't understand what the illustration is supposed to represent, I guess.
Right, so each dot is a person.
So each black point is
each
one
black
user. And when I'm A and you're B, I send you a mention, there's now an orange line connecting us. And so each of these fans is one person mentioning 20 other people. And so they all receive that mention. And that point is the originator. Does that kind of clear it up?
Yeah, it does.
A little bit?
We all good? This makes sense. Yeah. You can also see this. I'm gonna just not use this because it's really annoying. So you can also see this with like Mitt Romney and like Michelle Obama and the White House. These are celebrity accounts. So you see many users retweeting and mentioning some single user. So for example, this person right here, this is Michelle Obama in the middle. And you can kind of say, okay, well, anyone who's mentioning Michelle Obama, she's a celebrity, right? So, but you also have this like cascade of information, which kind of comes out from what she's saying. So you see all these blue lines coming out from the people that are mentioning and from her. And so you see how the information kind of comes out from her into other people. This is also an illustration maybe how rumors spread, right? So I say you something, you say something to him, you say something to her, right? So this is the kind of way we see how these rumors might spread as well, from one person to another, to a large audience.
And so here again, you see each person is an individual point, and so there are many people all they're mentioning Michelle Obama, saying, hey, listen to me, and so you see this cloud of black points around her, and then there's that cascade, when she says something, it catalyzes a discussion, and so you see that sort of bursting out from her. And so that's the structure we get here.
This is another example of spam. We actually increase the width of the lines when there's many people talking. This is another example of spam. So this is a very small number of users, relatively small number of users. I mean, this is like 100 people, right? But a small number of users, but they're all mentioning like each other and very so much that all we see are orange lines in between a few users. So this is characteristic of a spam bot.
And so what we do in an automated way, we can all see that these networks are different. And so we can train computers. We expose them to all of these different networks and say, this one is of this type, and this one is of this type, and this one is of this type. And in the same way that we're beginning to see common structural regularities between different kinds of networks, the computer can begin to make inferences and draw conclusions about data it hasn't seen before. And so we know that this looks suspicious, and we can train a computer to do the same thing.
So for each idea or topic that we're tracking, so we're tracking a lot of different topics about social movements, about politics, about news. For every single topic that we track, we provide a list of them. Provide a list of every single topic. We provide a list of every single topic we track when we have information about them, which is all the data that we've collected. So we collect data from the last 90 days, and we provide the user with a brief overview of what this topic is about. So you say hashtag Islam, it's a type of religion. It says at the top left. We actually use this from tagdef.com because anyone can say, okay, this is a type. This Islam means this or whatever. So you can see here that you can see the static network. We also provide a live stream of tweets, and we provide also a whole host of other visualizations. So this is another visualization. So at the very high level, you can say, okay, so this is a spam bot, or this is political communication, or this is a celebrity, or something like that, right? But each point, like who is each point? Like you can't say who's the most influential person, who's the most retweeted person, what are they saying, how many retweets do they have, who do they talk to the most often? There's a lot of questions that you can't answer with those very, very high pictures, right? There's a lot of questions that people don't want to ask. So what we do is we take the 20 most retweeted users and we visualize their connections with each other. And what you can do is you can go on the website and you can click on people and you can get more information about them. And we actually give their real name and everything. It's open data, right? So partisanship, we also predict their partisanship using the classifier that Mike talked about earlier, where we predict, okay, so this person's left or this person's right. And we color them in, so you can go and see, oh, is this a left-leaning meme, or a left-leaning topic, or a right-leaning topic? Yeah, that's what I'm working on. So you guys can check it out. It's truthy.indiana.edu.
So we want to thank our kick-ass collaborators. This is a big group effort. We've got a great group over at the Center for Complex Networks and Systems Research. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Ask while we're drinking some coffee. And thanks for your time.
So will we eventually have like a way to identify like a spam bot or whatever, via the security software that we already have in the machine? I mean, will we eventually have the veil, lifted to where we can know if we're actually seeing, this mass marketing campaign from the Republicans and Democrats versus an individual?
So this is a tough problem. The question was whether we're ever going to solve the issue of misinformation and spam effectively. And we see parallels in biology with coevolution, where as antibiotics get better, the diseases get better at avoiding the antibiotics. And this is why the spam you've received over the years has changed. And you start seeing garbage text, and then it looks more and more real. And you have this coevolutionary process where the spammers are trying to outwit the spam researchers, and the spam researchers are trying to outwit the spammers. There's actually what's called a botnet, which basically, when people download free screensavers, it infects their computer with a virus that then allows it to be used as a terminal for sending spam. And so security researchers will interrogate these networks to see what the command and control structure is like. And some years ago, there was a botnet, a very, very large botnet called Storm, that had effectively an immune system. When somebody would try to connect to the command and control infrastructure, it would perform a denial of service attack on that site. And so security researchers would try to connect to this botnet to study it, and it would send 10% of its huge spam network to just blast them off the internet. And so it creates a disincentive for people to research this botnet. And so I don't think it's ever going to be a solved problem.
So to follow up on that, so we've been hearing a lot recently in the news about foreign governments and politicians trying to influence the outcome of the presidential campaign here in the United States. But at the same time, we're also hearing about, let's say, ramping up of cyber security and cyber offensive military units in other countries like China, Iran, Syria, even Israel, UK, things like that. What if, and I know I'm getting hypothetical here, but if there is a government out there that can artificially create a system like you showed up there, one that looks organic, is there research going into identifying these sort of false organic, these false grassroots, not necessarily the way they look like when you showed the AstroTurf systems?
I mean, part of the project is also looking at trying to identify persuasion campaigns. And actually, someone's here right now, so next year is doing it. So persuasion campaigns, I think, is what you're talking about, right? Where someone from outside might try to persuade people.
Right, but by creating an infinitely large data set.
Yeah, I mean,
So the challenge in this research is getting good training data, because it's just very difficult to say this is fake, this is real. So big data means that we have tens of hundreds of millions and millions of data points, and so the problems of statistical noise sort of fall away. But producing a data set that says this is class A, this is a propaganda campaign, this is organic communication, is a very time-intensive process, and creating millions of data points it is a real challenge. And so I think statistically the machinery is there to make these inferences, but getting good data is very hard. One thing you might imagine doing, and we were just talking about this the other day, you can buy Twitter traffic.
they buy followers.
Followers or mentions, you just, it's sort of like the botnet. You buy spammers, you buy Twitter followers. You could...
Yeah, the problem is the government doesn't want, like, you can buy followers and then say, okay, well, we bought all these followers, so we know all these people are fake. So then you can say, okay, how are the spammers doing this? And then you start to say, okay, all these people are fake, all these people aren't.
It's like anybody who mentions this URL, we paid them to mention this URL.
Right.
What does that look like?
Yeah, but the problem is, if the government funds this research, then what are we actually? We are those people, right? We are the ones creating.
We're giving money to the bad guys. This is like Fast and the Furious with the arms and the... I mean, seriously, it's like, well, they're going to use the money. Yeah. So it's a tough problem, but it's an open problem. There's a lot of research going into it.
So there was a fairly high-profile news article recently about Target, the company Target, being able to figure out their customers based on their buying habits, whether or not they were pregnant, what their big, very personal information about them. So the research that you're doing, you're able to, for example, by looking at people's aggregate hashtags, get a much more full profile of a person than they necessarily realize that they're making public online. What sort of ethical discussions are going on in the research side of this to make sure that you don't put information out about people that they didn't necessarily intend to, even though all of this data individually is public?
There's some conversations that go on about it, and we try to, in general, publish, do sorts of things, to try to mention specific candidates when you say that they're, fostering misinformation campaigns or whatever. Try and keep it very, as transparent, but also as protective of the individuals as possible. But it's a trade-off, right? And it's hard to do this because something like our tool can be used by researchers to actually advance the communication studies. And when they download the data to put in aggregate for their own research, they might not get the actual names of the people, so we actually do it anonymously. But it's a tough problem.
So I think some of the things we try to do are focus on transparency. We're very open about what kind of data we're analyzing and how we analyze it, and the limitations of our methodology, because we're not predicting partisanship perfectly. based on the set of assumptions that we've bought into and what we know about how effectively this machine learning algorithm can make these predictions, we're providing these labels. And we do it only for people. You can set like a threshold. It's like we can make a prediction about anybody, but you can say, I need to be at a certain confidence level before I believe this. And so I think in this context, nobody would be surprised. We're only releasing predictions for people who are clearly very partisan. So I think we sort of have some comfort zone there. It is interesting and troubling, though, to think. I mean, I visited Twitter to talk about this, the partisanship prediction. They're making inferences about sexuality and your gender and your ethnic background and your age, and so I think certainly security through obscurity is not sufficient. I mean, to say that, well, we shouldn't talk about this because then people might use it, just puts you in a situation where somebody else can then make these inferences, and I mean, it basically keeps it moving. There's no discussion about it, and so in some sense it catalyzes a discussion about it. We try to be respectful in terms of like how liberal we are with providing these classifications. We only do it for extreme cases, but I think it's a very interesting question. It's somewhat troubling. I mean, especially when you think about people doing it for commercial or governmental.
But I mean, so even for the research reasons, like there are probably a lot of faculty members out there who don't want their political leanings known, and while it could be inferred from their data or their tweets, somebody just going to their Twitter profile might not necessarily see.
I mean, I think that. I mean, this is a tough problem. You make a really good point. And ostensibly you're engaging. This is a public forum. We only collect data that's publicly available. And if somebody can connect your Twitter handle to your real name, I mean, first she says real name, I think you mean the account name.
Yeah. Sorry, we don't.
You're engaging in speech in a public forum. And I think that like the scope of possibility for maliciousness with the data that we provide is somewhat limited. But I mean, if we made inferences about sexuality, which would be easy to do because social networks are assortative. There's like black Twitter and there's white Twitter. Just like we saw, there's right Twitter and there's left Twitter and there's gay Twitter and there's straight Twitter and everything in between. I mean, sexuality is certainly not such a clear division, but that would be something we would never do. But I think the scope of possibility for maliciousness is quite limited, if I could say.
I have a question. Has there been any studies on how effective this spamming is? Like, how much are they swaying public opinion using their techniques?
I came across a report. It was 13% of the Twitter tweets that they had. There was a random example. It was a small random example, but 13% of them they said could be spam. So I mean, I think it's pretty prevalent.
And so one of the things that catalyzed this line of research was a study going back to the 2008 Senate elections. In Massachusetts, there was a special election between Martha Coakley and Scott Brown. And Google used to monitor Twitter and put at the top of its search results real-time results for terms that had shown up on Twitter. And one of these coordinated deceiver networks contacted many individuals who had expressed interest in the election and said, hey, watch this video about Martha Coakley. What a scumbag. And you do this for 5,000 people. Enough of them retweeted it because just purely in terms of volume, you get a 5% response rate, but 5% of a very large number is still quite a large number. This made the Twitter trending topics algorithm, the Google trending topics algorithm, promote that link to the top of the Google search results for her name 3 days before the election. And so Google's dialed back some of this infrastructure, but the potential is certainly there. And I think it's like earthquakes. You get many, many small-scale attacks of this sort, but there's definitely evidence that infrequently large-scale efforts can be quite effective.
So Google includes Twitter trends?
They used to. I think in part for reasons like this, they have stopped doing this. But also, I think competitive advantage prohibits them from having access to it.
And so at this point, for instance, I've been trying to think of practical applications for this. When they had the debates, the conventions for the Republicans and Democrats, the coverage talked about the number of tweets after, basically during the course, they sort of curve over time. Is that subject to manipulation? You think, was there a...
It's tough because that'd be a pretty large scale. I mean, you've got millions and millions of people talking about politics.
But if you have an automated system, isn't that kind of the advantage that you can just make things release, or is that just release?
The thing is, like, the way that hundreds of thousands of people talk about something, it's very difficult to recreate that. And what we see is with spam is little jumps, But sometimes those little jumps are enough, but during national events, I don't think that you can really recreate.
And Twitter's pretty good at shutting down spam. This, like I said, it's a co-evolutionary process, but it's they've got pretty good algorithms. So I think creating an infrastructure on the scale of during the debate to have a significant uptick one way or the other would be tough. People will tell you that they're monitoring sentiment on the blogs and on social media. Don't believe them. They're lying. They're just... People talk about sentiment analysis and the positive sentiment for Obama or the positive sentiment for Mitt Romney. They're counting the number of times a tweet contains the word "good," and it's there's a great paper in this field called "I Can't Recommend This Paper Highly Enough." It's a tough problem, and so people for the next 3 or 5 years are going to be talking about the sentiment of content, and the algorithms aren't there yet. Keep sharp, guys.
Yeah.
Keep sharp.
Is that just because it's so easy to sort of, or I guess is the problem that it's just too difficult right now to
language is complicated. Yeah, people are sarcastic.
Like,
it's just it's counting positive words and negative words and saying good. The affect is on a linear scale, and a 4 is 1 unit better than a 3, and a 1 is 1 unit better than a 0. It's just, there's no basis in reality for that.
Right.
That's just not how language of the brain works.
Very new science. Natural language processing is brand new. It's for computers. Google's been able to translate things, but even that sucks. I don't know if you've ever tried to translate anything that isn't Spanish to English, but pretty much everything is kind of awful.
I guess a little further than that, will the technology be able to sort of adapt to that? Will there be
That's the idea.
How are you supposed to differentiate between sarcastic sort of comments about oh wow, this is fantastic debate about?
That's what employs people like us.
Yeah, it'll get solved, but I think it's in vogue right now to talk about it, and the money's just not there. You had a question?
So this I think segues well into what I've been thinking throughout most of your talk, which is it seems that there are two pretty obvious ways to determine whether something is fake or real. We're using those terms, although I'm not sure they always apply. But one would be to look at the content of what is being broadcast and say this makes sense or it doesn't make sense, or this is true or this is a lie, and it's matches physical reality or it's not. The others look at the shape of how it's transmitted. And I was wondering why you have chosen the approach to look at the shape of how these things are transmitted as opposed to content of what's being transmitted itself.
It just takes a lot of effort, so.
Well, and we use both. For what it's worth, we do use both.
But think about it, if you take the content of, and you have to annotate, say this is a lie, this is not, this is a lie. So there's actually a lot of bias there. What I think is a lie may not be what you think is a lie. So this is also a very ambiguous problem. You can try and use it and see how it does, but people can also, the facts can change, or people can, it's very...
And so it's tough, because effectively text mining is counting words. And there are some things it's really good at. For example, telling articles about proteins from articles about veterinary science. And some things it's not great at. And one of the complications of social media, especially Twitter, is that you have these really short messages. And so it's very sparse information on which to make a judgment, algorithmically. So our classifier for partisanship, the network classifier performs much better by about 25% than the text-based classifier. And it's related in part to the sparsity of the data. And it invokes this sort of phrase that nebulously attributed to the intelligence agencies that an amateur looks at what you say, the professional looks at who you say it to. and this is these networks of, around crime scenes, where it's like, you know that this is the drug guy. Who is he calling on his cell phone? We don't want to wiretap, because I just don't want to listen to him talk about nothing for 8 hours. I just want to know everybody he's called and everybody they've called, and that'll tell me everything I need to know. But I think the correct approach integrates both perspectives on the data. Yes, Mom?
Well, to take that kind of ethics and also put this into kind of a practical question, and I already talked about this stuff for a long time, I've never asked this question. So I'm concerned that last year 250,000 elephants were killed in Africa for their tusks. And it appears to me that one of the best ways to deal with that malady, is to go after the supply chain. It's a supply chain. So who are the people out there, not necessarily who are the people who are killing the elephants, but who are the people that are on that commodity end where ivory is the commodity? So what would prevent you as the editorial leader of the world from taking this kind of technology and applying it to the issue of the ivory trade?
So I think basically do these techniques generally.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of data, like gathering, these are like dark networks, terrorist networks, drug networks, the ivory trade. It's tough to get information about their activities. And certainly if we had a high resolution perspective on illegal trafficking, we could tell you who the kingpin was.
Or children.
Yeah, whatever it is. One interesting approach to this problem, though, is to take networks we can observe in which illicit activities is being undertaken and make generalizations to other kinds of networks. So World of Warcraft is a very popular online game. And there's a phenomenon called gold farming, where people who make very little in developing countries, even China and India, for example, will just work for 10 hours a day, just hustling, like doing the repetitive stuff that is required to get gold, and then they'll sell these on illegal currency markets. They'll sell this currency. But Blizzard, I think, is the company that runs World of Warcraft, has all of the data, and they know who's been busted for gold farming. And these networks mirror the structure of real-world drug rings. So we have limited data on real drug rings, and we know that they tend to have like a choke point. There's like the drug ring, and then there's the one guy everybody deals with when they're dealing with the drug ring. And so you can learn something about the structure of illicit activity in these environments we can observe and try to apply it to other networks where maybe our data quality is lower. And so I think this is a tractable problem. But it really is, a matter of resources in terms of gathering the data about any one kind of illicit activity.
I had a question on how long these data streams exist. Like, does Twitter have everything that's been generated on Twitter, and Google has everything that's been generated on Google Plus, Facebook the same? So isn't there a danger in them becoming like the J. Edgar Hoover of the modern time, where a young, Barack Obama or somebody is like goofing around and maybe, trying, experimenting with drugs or whatever, and they have this history of tweeting or, Facebooking, and it can be used to shape policy in the future someday.
Also, one of the kind of scary parts when we're talking about government surveillance. It's like, I might tweet something now, which is fine, under U.S. law. But what if U.S. law changes and now, it's illegal to talk about anarchism or something, and now I am retroactively taken out or something like that. Something like that is really possible, especially in the international spectrum. So it is kind of scary, actually.
So there is the case of the woman she's running for office, I think in Maine, and so she's on World of Warcraft, and she's been criticized for her character. Are there any examples of politicians, let's say, who have basically fallen because of something, their browsing history or their tweeting?
Anthony Weiner, right?
That's true.
Yeah, he had a direct message of his private parts, whatever, to some other lady.
That's right.
And You know, that was a direct message though, so it's really interesting how that got out, right? It's almost like people always talk about, oh yeah, he did something inappropriate on Twitter, but they don't. That was a direct message to someone else, which are supposed to be private. Like, how did those get out? You know. So.
It's interesting how the nature of scandal changes.
Yeah.
I mean, that like, you know, and I feel like the Paris Hilton sex tape was sort of a watershed moment where it was like, well, I guess she can still be famous, you know, and like, I feel like the you know, back when I was an undergrad, I would joke, what you do is you just search Facebook for major finance. You just save all those people's photos. And then you just wait 15 years. And like, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it's like, no, it's like, yeah, like I was doing a keg stand on Facebook. Like, can I help you? It's just not like, so then what is scandal is changing. And I mean, I think we're seeing, for example, in this main example, sort of the new resolutions. Like how do we feel collectively about this? Is this important or isn't this important? And it's, I think, an as yet unanswered question.
That reminded me of...
If anybody needs to leave, feel free to stand up. We're chilling here.
7:45.
Yeah, I gotta go. I gotta be somewhere.
She's gotta leave.
That reminded me of all those commercials. The truth is, whatever happens on...
Yeah, can we give it up for Karissa really quick? Let's have this be the last question.
Okay, well, just all those things about those commercials about whatever happens in Vegas stays permanently in security cameras. I mean, you know, they have all these commercials like Vegas is the place where nobody will ever know what you do ever. And it's undoubtedly exactly the opposite.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting observation. And I mean, I think, yeah, you for example, there were these, you know, you think about your private messages on Facebook, and you know, it's like, well, it's chat, you know. I mean, even better is you log into, you know, just. I think I would say probably 90% of the people in this room have bought something on the internet that they might not want their coworkers knowing about, and that's just ingenious, and it's just like it's just there, and it's just going to stay there. Because, you know, you can deactivate your account, but they're not going to delete your data. Like I said, the problem is getting the data. That is the money. Like, the algorithms, the statistics are in place. We just need the data. And you can delete your Facebook profile, but all that information is still there. And it's sort of like, okay, we can accept, you know, Google's motto unofficially was do no evil. And we can accept that, for the sake of argument, Google's never going to try to blackmail me. Well, LinkedIn had this password breach. 6 million people's passwords were just released into the wild. And it's like, okay, so Google's not going to blackmail me. But what about, you know, this Russian guy who's just like in the business of stealing credit cards? And it's just like, you know, this is just information that I can use, and or anybody, you know. And so the trust, like I trust any organization only insofar as I trust the encryption standards. You know, it's like, they might not want to do wrong by me, but yeah, you know, so anybody who works at the university and uses anybody who's employed by the university, I should say, so this includes graduate students, your email records are subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. And so anybody who wants to know what you've been saying on your campus email can just say, yeah, you know, you gotta wait about 9 months, because they, you know, it's sort of free information. But they can just get your email records. And so yeah, you're exposing yourself to all of these data stores in ways that I think are difficult to understand and impossible to predict when you begin to think about the ways these data sources can be recombined. And so we have, on one hand, this tremendous potential, I mean, truly a revolution on the scale of the printing press. I mean, more than television, in terms of making it easy for people to engage in critical and creative culture. But there's, I mean, hand in glove with this is all of these issues that make it very unsettling and also equally unprecedented in terms of the ability of an organization, for good or for ill, to track your behavior and know a lot about you.
One real quick, when you're talking about financial vulnerability, one thing we can do in Indiana for free, we don't have to charge for it, is freeze our credit reports. And then we can unfreeze as we need credit and as we want to apply for credit. But that is a complete stop as far as someone, becoming you and writing all kinds of checks and other stuff. It's very effective. It's free too.
Right. Well, let's call it, because I think it's getting a little late. This was really interesting. Thank you all for coming, and